The script opens with the jarring contrast of luxury and violence. The champagne was cold, but his grip was hot iron. Within seconds, Jamila's sophisticated updo is ruined as Adam's fist twists into her hair, forcing her to her knees in front of the industry's elite. The introduction focuses on the silence of the bystanders. The neon noir lighting and blurred celebrity faces create a sense of isolation for Jamila. The audience is instantly hooked by the arrival of Hyun-Woo, whose only movement is the slow, deliberate adjustment of a gold cufflink, a gesture that promises a much higher level of danger than Adam's frantic rage. The silk sheets were too cool, too smooth, and far too expensive to belong to anyone I knew. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling was a vast expanse of polished dark wood, illuminated by the soft, ambient glow of recessed lighting that mimicked the onset of dawn. For a heartbeat, the silence was a relief, a stark contrast to the thumping bass and the sound of my own screams at Nadia's afterparty. Then the memory of the first tug at my scalp rushed back, and I sat up so fast the world tilted. My hand flew to my hair. The sophisticated updo was gone, replaced by a tangled mess of dark curls that felt tender at the roots where Adam's fist had been. I was still wearing the champagne gold slip dress, though the silk was now wrinkled, a shimmering reminder of the night my life shattered. I scanned the room. It was cavernous, minimalist, and smelled faintly of sandalwood and expensive tobacco. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a manicured Japanese garden shrouded in a light morning mist. This wasn't a hospital, and it certainly wasn't the police station. It was a fortress of glass and stone. "You're awake." The voice was like low-frequency thunder. I turned to see Choi Hyun-Woo standing by a heavy obsidian desk in the corner. He had discarded the charcoal suit jacket from the night before. His crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar and sleeves rolled back to reveal forearms that looked carved from granite. He was holding a glass of water, which he set down on the nightstand with a soft clink that sounded like a gavel. "Drink," he commanded. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a threat either. It was the tone of a man used to being obeyed by the very air he breathed. I reached for the glass, my fingers trembling. "Where is he? Where is Adam?" Hyun-Woo pulled a heavy leather chair toward the bed and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His sharp, chiseled face was unreadable, his eyes as dark and deep as the obsidian desk behind him. "Adam Percy is alive. For now. He is currently being handled by my associates regarding a series of outstanding obligations." "Obligations?" I whispered, the water feeling like lead in my stomach. "He attacked me. He dragged me across a ballroom in front of everyone. He should be in jail." Hyun-Woo let out a short, mirthless breath. "In jail, he is useless to me. And more importantly, in jail, he cannot pay what he owes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound ledger. He flipped it open, his thumb tracing a line of neat, handwritten kanji and figures. "Your ex-boyfriend has a very expensive habit, Jamila. High-stakes baccarat is a cruel mistress to a man with no discipline. Over the last 6 months, he has accrued a debt to my organization that his celebrity status cannot cover." I felt a cold shiver trace my spine. What does that have to do with me? Why am I here? Hyun-Woo closed the book with a definitive snap. He looked at me, then really looked at me, his gaze lingering on the bruise starting to bloom along my jawline. "Last night when Adam cornered you, he wasn't just trying to force you back into a relationship. He was trying to collect. He had promised his creditors that you, your career, your endorsements, your very presence, were his to leverage. He offered you as collateral to stay his execution for another week." The room felt like it was shrinking. I thought of the way Adam had looked at me at the party, not with love, but with the frantic hunger of a man looking at a winning lottery ticket. I was a commodity to him, a trade-in. I don't belong to him. I hissed, my voice cracking with a mix of fury and terror. "He can't sell me." "He tried," Hyun-Woo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous silkiness. "And the men he dealt with are not known for their patience or their manners. They would have taken you from that party, and you would not have woken up in a silk bed." He paused, his focus intensifying. "I stepped in because I do not like messy business in my city. I bought your ledger, Jamila. I paid off Adam's debt in full." I looked at the shimmering gold fabric of my dress, feeling suddenly naked. "So now I owe you? Is that what this is? I've just been traded from one monster to a more expensive one." Hyun-Woo stood up, the movement fluid and predatory. He stepped closer, reaching out a hand. I flinched, but he didn't touch my skin. Instead, he reached for the gold cufflink he had adjusted the night before, now sitting on the nightstand, and rolled it between his fingers. I don't collect people, Jamila. I collect loyalty, he said, looking down at me. Your freedom was expensive. Adam is now my debtor, but you are my investment. You are safe here because if anyone touches you, they are stealing from me. And I do not let anyone steal from the Yakuza. He turned to leave, his silhouette framed by the cold morning light of the garden. Rest. A stylist will be here at noon. You have an image to maintain, and from this moment on that image reflects on me. As the heavy door clicked shut, I realized the terrifying truth. I was no longer running from a ghost in the dark. I was a bird in a golden cage, and the man who held the key was far more dangerous than the one I had escaped. The sun was high over the Tokyo skyline by the time the heavy wooden doors of my suite groaned open again. I had spent the last few hours pacing the length of the room, my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows looking like a ghost in expensive silk. The stylist Hyun-Woo promised had arrived, a silent, sharp-featured woman who dressed me in a structured, midnight blue sheath dress that felt more like armor than fashion. When I was finally let out of the room, the estate felt different in the daylight. It was a masterpiece of contradictions. The hallways were lined with ancient inkwash paintings and delicate bonsai trees, but every few yards, men in black suits stood with the rigid, unblinking stillness of gargoyles. They didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of their attention. A silent, lethal efficiency that made the hair on my arms stand up. I found Hyun-Woo in a glass-walled dining terrace that overlooked a koi pond. He looked every bit the billionaire elite. His charcoal vest fitted perfectly to his frame. A silk tie knotted with mathematical precision. He was reading a physical newspaper, a steaming cup of tea at his elbow. The scene was so domestic, so civilized, that for a moment I forgot he was the man who had bought my life. Sit, Jamila, he said without looking up. The protein is for your strength. The fruit is for your complexion. You'll need both today. A servant appeared instantly, placing a plate of grilled salmon and vibrant greens before me. As I picked up the silver fork, heavy and perfectly balanced, I watched him. His manners were impeccable. He moved with a refined grace, the way he handled his tea and the quiet authority in his voice suggesting a man of high culture. The illusion of the gentleman was shattered when a man burst onto the terrace. He was one of the guards, his face pale and his breathing ragged. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the stone floor. Hyun-Woo-sama, the guard rasped in Japanese. The shipment from the docks. There was a complication with the longshoremen. They refused the signature. Hyun-Woo didn't flinch. He didn't even put down his tea. He simply finished his sip, set the porcelain cup back into its saucer with a delicate clink, and finally looked at the man. The warmth I had imagined in the morning light evaporated. His eyes became two pieces of black glass, reflecting nothing but the guard's terror. A refusal is a lack of respect, Hyun-Woo said, his voice dropping to a register that made the water in the koi pond seem to shiver. And a lack of respect is a debt that must be collected immediately. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He gave a small, almost imperceptible tilt of his head toward the two guards standing at the edge of the terrace. In a blur of motion that I could barely track, the two guards moved. There was no shouting, no wasted energy. They flanked the kneeling messenger, their hands moving to the concealed holsters beneath their jackets with a synchronized mechanical precision. The air in the terrace grew heavy with the sudden sharp scent of ozone and gun oil. Show them the price of a broken contract, Hyun-Woo added, his tone as casual as if he were ordering more tea. And ensure the longshoremen understand that my patience ended at dawn. The guards hoisted the messenger up, not out of cruelty, but as if he were a piece of equipment to be moved, and vanished into the house. The terrace returned to its eerie, tranquil silence. Hyun-Woo turned back to me, the lethal hardness in his face smoothing out into that mask of high society politeness. He picked up a slice of pear with his fork and offered it toward me. You aren't eating, Jamila, he noted, his voice once again smooth and melodic. Is the food not to your liking? I looked at the fork, then at his eyes, trying to reconcile the man who appreciated fine art with the man who had just ordered a bloodbath between sips of tea. He was the suit and the sword, the velvet glove and the iron fist. "I'm not hungry," I managed to say, my throat tight. "A pity," he replied, his gaze dropping to the gold-rimmed cufflink on his left sleeve, which he adjusted with a slow, rhythmic twist. "Power requires sustenance. And tonight, the world needs to see you at your most powerful." I realized then that his protection wasn't just a shield, it was a brand. I was being kept in a beautiful garden, surrounded by the most polite monsters in the world, and for the first time I wondered if I would ever be allowed to leave it alive. The following evening the estate was bathed in a deceptive rose-colored twilight. I was standing on the balcony of the library, watching the shadows lengthen over the stone lanterns in the garden, when the heavy silence of the house was punctuated by the sound of a high-end engine and the sharp click of heels on the driveway. Nadia looked like a frantic bird of paradise as she was escorted into the drawing room. Her usual composure, the ironclad confidence of a woman who ran the city's most exclusive circles, was gone. Her designer dress was slightly rumpled, and her eyes darted toward the two guards stationed at the door with a look of pure, unadulterated dread. "Jamila," she gasped, rushing toward me the moment I entered the room. She stopped short of hugging me, her hands hovering in the air as if she were afraid that touching me might trigger an alarm. "Oh, thank God. I've been calling. I've been trying to get through the gates for 24 hours. They wouldn't let me in until he gave the word." I looked at my old friend, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "I'm fine, Nadia. Hyun-Woo has been hospitable." At the mention of his name, Nadia flinched so violently she nearly knocked over a porcelain vase. She lowered her voice to a frantic whisper, pulling me toward the center of the room, away from the stone-faced guards. "Hospitable? Jamila, do you have any idea whose house you're in? Do you know what people are saying?" She gripped my forearms, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "The industry is in a tailspin. Adam has disappeared. Completely. His manager, his publicist, his family. No one has seen him since the party. And the rumors about why Choi Hyun-Woo took you. They're saying he didn't just intervene. They're saying he claimed a debt that can never be paid. Adam owed him money," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A lot of it. He used me as collateral." Nadia's face went pale, a sickly gray tone beneath her expensive foundation. "Then you need to leave. Now, before the ink dries on whatever contract he thinks he has on you. Jamila, the celebrity world we live in is just a playground, but Hyun-Woo, he owns the land the playground is built on. I've seen men like him erase entire families because of a misplaced word. My husband told me that if I came here, I was signing my own death warrant." She looked around the room, her eyes wide with a frantic, hunted look. "People are terrified to even speak your name because it's linked to his now. You're not a it girl anymore. You're Yakuza property. The brands are dropping you not because they're mad, but because they're scared that sending you a legal notice might offend him." "He hasn't hurt me," I argued, though the weight of the gold ring on my finger, placed there by his staff earlier that day, felt heavier with every word she spoke. "He doesn't have to hurt you to destroy you," Nadia hissed. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a burner phone, thrusting it into my hand. "Take this. If you get a chance to run, call the number on the speed dial. It's a private extraction team. They won't ask questions." A shadow fell across the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Choi Hyun-Woo stood there, his midnight black suit jacket open just enough to reveal the dark silk of his waistcoat. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He simply leaned against the doorframe, his chiseled face illuminated by the flickering light of the wall sconces. He began to slowly, methodically adjust the gold cufflink on his left sleeve. Nadia froze. Her hands began to shake so uncontrollably that the burner phone clattered to the floor, sliding across the polished wood until it tapped against the toe of Hyun-Woo's handmade Italian leather shoes. "Nadia," he said, his voice a low melodic purr that carried the sharp edge of a blade. "I didn't realize Jamila was expecting visitors. It is a rare thing for someone to be so courageous as to seek an audience here without an invitation." Nadia couldn't even find her voice. She looked like she was about to faint. Hyun-Woo looked down at the phone, then back up at her. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've brought a gift. How thoughtful. He stepped into the room, and Nadia scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a chair. However, I believe Jamila has everything she needs, including protection that a plastic device cannot provide. He looked at me, a silent command in his gaze. Your friend was just leaving, Jamila. The celebrity world is a busy place, and I would hate for her to be late for her next engagement. Nadia didn't wait for a second dismissal. She fled. She didn't look back and she didn't say goodbye. The sound of her tires screeching on the gravel outside was the last sound of my old life. Hyun-Woo picked up the burner phone, crushed it in one hand with a sickening crunch of plastic and glass, and dropped the remains into a wastebasket. Blood and champagne, Jamila, he said, walking toward me until he was close enough that I could smell the sandalwood on his skin. Everyone wants the latter, but no one is willing to spill the former to keep it. Except for me. He reached out, his thumb grazing the bruise on my jaw with a tenderness that was more terrifying than a blow. Do you still want to run back to them? To the people who watched you scream and did nothing? I looked at the debris of the phone, then up at him. The celebrity world was gone. There was only the neon noir of his reality, and the cold, gold certainty of the man who now held my shadow in his hand. The crushing of the phone was a finality that lingered in the air, a metaphor for the world I had left behind. For the next 2 days the estate was hushed, the only sound the rhythmic sweep of the gardener's brooms and the distant, muffled voices of men in dark suits conducting business I wasn't meant to hear. I was no longer a guest. I was a ghost haunting a palace of high-stakes secrets. I was summoned to Hyun-Woo's private study on the third night. Unlike the rest of the house, which felt like a museum of traditional elegance, the study was a nerve center of modern power. Banks of monitors flickered with silent data streams, and the walls were lined with books in a dozen languages. Hyun-Woo was standing by a window, his back to me. He had traded his suit jacket for a traditional black silk haori, the heavy fabric making his shoulders seem impossibly broad. You've had time to think, Jamila, he said, not turning around. Time to realize that the life you lived was a glass house, and Adam was the stone that finally broke it. I realize I've traded one cage for another, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Nadia was right. People don't look at me anymore. They look through me to see you. I'm just a shadow. Hyun-Woo turned then. The light from the monitors cast a cool, blue glow across the sharp planes of his face, making him look less like a man and more like an ancient deity of retribution. A shadow is a byproduct of light. I have no use for shadows. And I certainly have no use for a victim. He walked toward me, his movements silent on the deep pile rug. He stopped just inches away, his presence a physical weight. The world thinks I took you to save a damsel in distress. They think I am sentimental. That is a dangerous perception for a man in my position. It makes me look soft. Then let me go, I challenged. Prove them wrong. No, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly silk. I'm going to prove them wrong by showing them what you actually are. You think you are weak because Adam dragged you by the hair. I think you are strong because you didn't break until the very end. Most would have broken years ago. He reached for a dossier on his desk and tossed it toward me. It was filled with photos of men in suits, maps of the harbor, and legal documents with the Yakuza's crimson seal. There is a negotiation tomorrow night. A merger of interests that will decide the fate of the shipping routes for the next decade. The men I am meeting with are old, traditional, and deeply sexist. They expect me to show up with a trophy. A silent, smiling woman who knows her place. I looked at the photos, the faces of cold, calculating predators staring back at me. And what do you expect? I expect a partner, Hyun-Woo said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart hammer against my ribs. I don't want you to sit there and look beautiful. I want you to sit there and look like the woman who knows where all the bodies are buried. I want you to speak when I signal, and I want you to show them that if they cross me, they are crossing you. I need a woman who can stand in the middle of a storm and not blink. He stepped even closer, his hand rising to trace the line of my jaw, his thumb lingering near the corner of my mouth. Adam wanted to sell you as a commodity. I want to invest in you as an asset. But for this to work, you have to stop looking for the exit. You have to decide that you are no longer the girl being pulled by her hair. You are the woman holding the leash. The terms of agreement weren't written in ink. They were written in the cold, hard logic of survival. He wasn't offering me a way out. He was offering me a way up. But the height was dizzying. What if I fail? I whispered. What if I blink? Then we both lose, he said simply. And in my world, losing isn't an option. Tomorrow you will wear the blue silk I bought you. You will wear the diamonds I provided. And you will walk into that room as if you own every soul in it. Because for that one night, you will. He turned back to his monitors, the dismissal as sharp as a blade. As I walked out, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a weapon being sharpened, and for the first time, the fear was eclipsed by a dark, shimmering sense of anticipation. The sanctuary of the estate began to feel less like a fortress and more like a pressure cooker. While the interior remained a masterclass in silent luxury, the world outside the reinforced gates was beginning to rot. It started with the notifications. Even though Hyun-Woo's team had scrubbed my digital footprint, Adam was a man who had made a career out of obsession. He didn't need a current number to find me. He simply began screaming into the void of my old cloud accounts, knowing I would eventually see the echoes. You think you're safe in that pagoda? One message read, timed at 3 in the morning. You're just a temporary toy for a man who kills for sport. When he's done with you, I'll be waiting at the gate. I sat in the library, the glow of the screen washing over my face in the dark. The messages were a frantic stream of consciousness, alternating between weeping pleas for forgiveness and jagged, violent threats. He was losing his mind because he had lost his leverage. To Adam, I wasn't just a woman. I was the currency he needed to stay alive, and he could hear the debt collectors closing in. By the second day, the digital stalking became physical. One of the security feeds in the kitchen caught a grainy image of a man in a matte black shirt standing across the street, partially obscured by the shadows of a cherry blossom tree. He didn't move for hours. He just stared at the high stone walls, a dark silhouette against the neon hum of the city beyond. I was watching the monitor when Hyun-Woo entered the room. He didn't look at the screen, he looked at me. His presence was a heavy, grounding force that made Adam's frantic energy feel small. Yet the danger was no less real. He's been there since midnight, I whispered, pointing to the shadow on the screen. He's sending messages, Hyun-Woo. He says he's going to wait until you throw me out. Hyun-Woo stepped behind me, his hand resting on the back of my chair. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me it would be okay. Instead, he leaned down, his voice vibrating near my ear. He is a ghost, Jamila. And ghosts only have power if you believe they can touch you. He cannot breach these walls. He cannot even breathe the air inside this gate unless I allow it. But he's still there, I countered, my voice trembling. The shadow doesn't go away. The shadow is a reminder of what happens to men who miscalculate, Hyun-Woo said coldly. He reached past me and tapped a command into the security console. The camera zoomed in, sharpening the image until I could see the sweat on Adam's brow and the frantic, wide-eyed look of a cornered animal. Adam looked pathetic. He looked like the very thing he had always accused me of being, weak. Hyun-Woo adjusted the cufflink on his sleeve, the gold catching the light of the monitors. He is hoping I will kill him quickly. He is hoping for an end to the fear. But I find that fear is a much more effective teacher than a bullet. Suddenly, the phone in my hand buzzed. Another message. I'm coming in, Jamila. I'll burn that house down before I let him keep you. I showed the screen to Hyun-Woo. He didn't flinch. Instead, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. The kind of smile that made me realize the Yakuza didn't just protect their assets. They baited their traps with them. Let him try, Hyun-Woo murmured. He thinks he is the hunter because he is standing in the dark. He doesn't realize the dark belongs to me. He turned to the lead guard standing by the door. Increase the perimeter sweep, but do not engage. Let him stay. Let him watch. Let him realize that every minute he spends outside that gate, his life is being dismantled piece by piece in the city. By the time he finds the courage to climb the wall, he will have nothing left to save. Hyun-Woo looked back at me, his gaze softening just a fraction. Go to sleep, Jamila. Tomorrow is the negotiation. You cannot have shadows under your eyes when you are meant to be the light. I left the room, but as I walked down the long, silent corridor, I could still feel the phantom weight of Adam's grip on my hair. He was out there, a desperate man with nothing to lose circling the cage. And inside, the man who held the key was waiting for him to make the final fatal mistake. The air was thick with the scent of an approaching storm, and I knew that soon, the champagne and the blood would finally mix. The stillness of the estate was broken not by a sound, but by a shift in the atmosphere. The guards stood a fraction straighter, their eyes fixed on a point just beyond the shoji screens of the inner courtyard. Hyun-Woo had summoned me to the pavilion, a place of extreme beauty where the water of the koi pond flowed over smooth river stones. He was dressed for the evening's negotiation, midnight black wool, crisp white linen, but his attention was focused on a man kneeling in the center of the stone path. The man was Kenji, one of the high-level security liaisons I had seen whispering with Hyun-Woo only days before. Now he was trembling, his forehead pressed against the cold stone, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "I was told there was a leak," Hyun-Woo said, his voice as calm as the still water beside them. He was standing with his back to Kenji, staring at a blooming white camellia. "A small leak. A digital breadcrumb left for the creditors who are currently hunting Adam Percy. Someone gave them the coordinates of our supply route." "Hyun-Woo-sama, please," Kenji whispered, his voice cracking. "My family. The debt was so high. I thought. You thought my generosity had a limit, so you tested the limits of my enemies instead," Hyun-Woo interrupted. He turned slowly, his face a mask of terrifying serenity. There was no rage in his eyes, only a profound, icy disappointment that felt far more lethal than anger. I stood by the pillar, the blue silk of my dress feeling like a weight. I wanted to look away, but I remembered what Hyun-Woo had said about being a woman who doesn't blink. This was the reality of the world I had entered. This was the price of the protection I had accepted. Hyun-Woo stepped toward the kneeling man. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his hand. He simply stood over him, the height and breadth of his silhouette swallowing the smaller man. "Mercy is a luxury for those who have nothing to lose," Hyun-Woo murmured. "In this house we do not deal in luxuries. We deal in loyalty." He reached down, his fingers moving to his left sleeve. My breath hitched. I watched as he gripped the gold-rimmed cufflink, turning it with a slow, rhythmic precision. It was a small, elegant gesture, the kind a man makes before a toast or a speech, but as the gold caught the dying light of the sun, I saw the two guards at the edge of the pavilion move. They didn't hesitate. There was no command given, no shout. The cufflink adjustment was the only signal they needed. It was the switch that moved the machine from standby to execution. They moved with a synchronized, mechanical cruelty, hauling Kenji to his feet. One guard placed a hand over the man's mouth, stifling his final plea, while the other secured his arms. They didn't lead him toward the gate. They led him toward the darkness of the lower gardens, a place where the shadows were deep and the earth was soft. Hyun-Woo didn't watch them leave. He didn't even acknowledge the struggle. He simply finished the adjustment of his cufflink, ensuring the silk of his shirt sat perfectly against his wrist. He looked at me, his gaze scanning my face for any sign of the victim he had forbidden me to be. "That is the sound of a contract being closed, Jamila," he said, his voice once again smooth and melodic. "It is quiet, it is efficient, and it is final." He walked toward me, the scent of sandalwood and cold air following him. He reached out, his hand resting on the small of my back, guiding me toward the waiting car for the negotiation. Adam thinks he is stalking a cage. He doesn't realize that the man who guards the cage is the same man who just erased a decade of Kenji's service with a single turn of a wrist. As we walked through the estate, the guards bowed in a wave of black suits. The silence was absolute. I realized then that the mercy of Choi Hyun-Woo was not the absence of violence. It was the precision of it. He provided safety, but it was a safety built on the bones of those who dared to blink. I stepped into the back of the car, the leather cool against my skin, and for the first time I didn't look back at the gates. I looked at Hyun-Woo, whose profile was etched in the silver light of the city. I was no longer afraid of the man outside the walls. I was part of the man inside them. The car ride to the negotiation was a suffocating study in silence. Outside the tinted glass, the neon lights of the city blurred into streaks of electric blue and jagged crimson. Beside me, Hyun-Woo was a statue of obsidian and silk, his gaze fixed on the passing skyline. I felt the weight of the burner phone, The second one, the one I had found tucked into the lining of the new designer clutch Adam had somehow managed to swap into the estate's dressing room. The screen had flickered to life just as we left the gates. Jamila, please. I know what he did to Kenji. I saw them take him to the gardens. Hyun-Woo is a monster and you're next. Meet me at the service entrance of the pier. I have a boat waiting. I've cleared everything. We can go to Ghana, to London, anywhere. Just come to the side door. Please, before he kills us both. I looked at the back of Hyun-Woo's head, then at the phone hidden in the silk folds of my lap. Adam sounded desperate, but for the first time he sounded like he was telling the truth. The memory of the cufflink signal in the garden was still raw, the way life was extinguished without a second thought. When we arrived at the harbor, the air was thick with the scent of salt and industrial grease. The negotiation was taking place in a private lounge overlooking the shipping containers, but as the guards stepped out to scout the perimeter, I saw my opening. I need a moment, I whispered to Hyun-Woo, gesturing toward the vanity mirrors in the hallway. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine with a terrifying clarity. For a second, I thought he could see the vibration of the phone against my thigh. Do not be long, Jamila. The men inside do not like to wait for their investments. I nodded and slipped away, my heels clicking rapidly against the metal grating. I didn't go to the mirrors. I moved toward the service entrance, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pushed open the heavy steel door, the cold harbor wind whipping my hair across my face. Adam was there. He looked haggard, his matte black shirt stained with sweat, his eyes darting frantically. Jamila! Thank God. Come on, the boat is right under the pier. We have 5 minutes before his guards realize. He grabbed my wrist and for a split second, I felt a rush of old familiar relief. I stepped toward him, but as we rounded the corner of the shipping crate, the relief turned to ice. 3 men were standing there. They weren't Yakuza. They were dressed in cheap, loud suits, their faces scarred and their eyes hungry. They held heavy, serrated blades, and one had a silenced pistol aimed directly at my chest. She's here, Adam said, his voice changing instantly. The desperation was gone, replaced by a pathetic, wheezing triumph. He didn't pull me toward a boat. He shoved me toward the men. I brought her. Like we agreed. The debt is wiped. The baccarat, the interest, everything. She's yours. I stumbled, my knees hitting the wet concrete. Adam. He wouldn't look at me. He was already backing away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. You were always going to be someone's prize, Jamila. At least this way I get to live. The man with the pistol stepped forward, the barrel cold against my forehead. The Yakuza boss has a high price on his head, but his woman, she's worth more as a message. We take her, and Hyun-Woo loses his face before he loses his life. I looked up at Adam, who was already halfway to the parking lot. The way out was a transaction. I hadn't been rescued. I had been sold again, traded like a piece of livestock to settle a loser's tab. The silence of the harbor was broken only by the lapping of the dark water against the pilings. Then from the shadows of the upper walkway I heard it. A slow, deliberate click-click. The sound was small, but in the stillness of the pier, it sounded like a thunderclap. I looked up and saw a silhouette standing against the moon. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't shouting. Choi Hyun-Woo was standing perfectly still, his fingers resting on his left sleeve, his eyes fixed on the man holding the gun to my head. He began to adjust his cufflink. The man with the pistol laughed, but the sound died in his throat as red laser dots suddenly bloomed across his chest like a rash of glowing blood. You're late, boss, the gunman hissed. I am never late. Hyun-Woo's voice drifted down, cold and melodic. I am simply waiting for the contract to be fully revealed. And now that I see the price of your betrayal, Adam, the negotiation can truly begin. The trap hadn't been for me. The trap had been set by the man in the charcoal suit the moment he let me walk away. I was the bait, and the predators had just walked right into the light. The pier was a stage of shadows and sharp light. The gunman with the pistol frozen to my forehead was no longer a predator. He was a target, his bravado evaporating under the dozens of crimson dots dancing across his chest. Adam was frozen a few yards away, caught between the car and the abyss, his face a mask of pathetic, trembling shock. Drop the weapon. Hyun-Woo's voice drifted down from the walkway, as calm as if he were ordering a second cup of tea. Or the contract on your life will be fulfilled before you can pull the trigger. The gunman's hand shook. He looked at the laser sights, then at the silhouette of the Yakuza boss, and realized the math didn't add up in his favor. The pistol clattered onto the concrete. Jamila, Hyun-Woo called out. Stand up. I didn't just stand, I rose. I wiped the grit from my palms and adjusted the midnight blue silk of my dress, feeling a cold crystalline clarity settle over me. For years I had been the prize or the victim. I had been the currency Adam traded and the damsel Hyun-Woo protected. But as I looked at Adam, shivering, sweating, and ready to sell my soul for a few more hours of his miserable life, the cycle finally snapped. I walked toward the gunman, stepping over the discarded pistol. The guards descended from the shadows like smoke, pinning the 3 hired thugs to the shipping crates. I didn't stop until I was standing directly in front of Adam. You told them I was the message, I said, my voice low and steady. You told them I was the key to his life. Jamila, baby, please, Adam stammered, his eyes darting toward the darkness. I had to. They were going to kill me. I was going to come back for you, I swear. I reached out and grabbed him by the collar of his matte black shirt. He flinched, expecting a blow. But I just pulled him closer until our faces were inches apart. You didn't come here to save me, Adam. You came here because you're a coward who thinks everyone else is as small as you are. I turned back toward the walkway. Hyun-Woo was descending the metal stairs, his movements fluid and rhythmic. He stopped beside me, his presence a wall of cold, unyielding power. He looked at me, waiting to see if the investment he had made would finally pay dividends. He's irrelevant, Hyun-Woo, I said, my gaze never leaving Adam's terrified eyes. He's not the one who organized this. He doesn't have the brains to coordinate with a rival syndicate. I reached into Adam's pocket and pulled out his phone, the one he thought was his secret. I handed it to Hyun-Woo. The calls aren't just from creditors. Look at the timestamps. He's been talking to the longshoreman liaison, the one who refused the signature yesterday. This wasn't a debt repayment. It was a distraction. Hyun-Woo's eyes flared with a dark, appreciative fire. He took the phone, his thumb scrolling through the logs. The harbor merger, he murmured. They wanted me focused on a domestic dispute, while they moved the shipment. He looked at me, and for the first time the cufflink adjustment wasn't a signal for my protection, it was an invitation. He stepped back, giving me the floor. What do we do with him? Hyun-Woo asked. I looked at Adam. I saw the man who had dragged me by the hair, who had barricaded me in my own life, and who had just tried to trade me for a boat ride. The fear was gone. In its place was a profound, icy indifference. Give him exactly what he wanted, I said. He wanted to be out of the city. He wanted to be gone. Send him to the northern docks. Put him on a freighter with no name and no destination. Let him be a ghost in a world where no one knows his face or his celebrity status. Let him realize that without me to sell, he is worth absolutely nothing. Adam began to wail, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the wind. The guards moved in, dragging him toward the dark water not as a threat, but as refuse to be discarded. Hyun-Woo stepped closer, his hand coming up to rest on the small of my back. A freighter, he mused, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Poetic. And efficient. He looked at the 3 thugs pinned against the crates, then back at me. You didn't blink, Jamila. I'm done blinking, I replied. We walked back toward the car, leaving the chaos of the pier behind. I wasn't the bait anymore, and I wasn't the victim. I was the woman who had just dismantled a rival's play before the first shot was fired. The cycle was broken, and as the car door closed, I realized that the golden cage hadn't just been for my safety. It had been my training ground. The new queen was coming, and she was far more dangerous than the king. The lights of the grand ballroom were blinding. A sea of flashing diamonds and crystal chandeliers that mirrored the frantic energy of the industry's biggest night. A week ago, this same atmosphere would have made my breath hitch with anxiety. A week ago, I was a woman looking for the nearest exit, terrified that a shadow in a matte black shirt would materialize from the crowd. Tonight the shadow was gone. Adam Percy had been erased, not just from the room, but from the very fabric of the city. His name was no longer whispered in the hallways of power. His face had vanished from the digital screens that once touted his celebrity. He was a ghost on a nameless freighter, a man who had discovered too late that in a world of predators, the smallest dog is the first to be discarded. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open, and the hum of 1,000 conversations died instantly. It was a silence I recognized, the same silence that had greeted my humiliation at Nadia's afterparty. But this time the air didn't feel heavy with judgment. It felt thick with a newfound terrifying respect. I walked in first. My champagne gold dress was gone, replaced by a gown of midnight velvet that clung to my frame like a second skin, trailing behind me like a storm cloud. My hair, once ruined by a violent fist, was styled in a sharp, sleek crown that emphasized the defiant line of my jaw. Beside me, Choi Hyun-Woo moved with a predatory grace that made the crowd part like the Red Sea. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket tonight. He wore a traditional, high-collared black coat that made him look like a dark king returned to his throne. As we reached the center of the room, he stopped, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. "They are waiting for a sign, Jamila," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that only I could hear. "Give it to them." I didn't look at him. I looked at the front row of the elite, the designers, the moguls, and Nadia, who stood frozen with a glass of champagne halfway to her lips. I slowly raised my left hand, ostensibly to adjust a stray lock of hair. The movement was deliberate. The overhead spotlights caught the massive, flawless diamond Hyun-Woo had placed on my finger. It wasn't a traditional engagement ring. It was a statement of territory, a heavy band of gold and ice that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 jagged shards. To the world, it was a statement of ownership. To me, it was the badge of a woman who had walked through the fire and learned how to control the flame. The room understood. I saw the realization dawn on their faces, the shift from pity to fear, from gossip to reverence. I wasn't the victim who had been rescued. I was the partner who had been chosen. A prominent older mogul, a man who had ignored my screams only days ago, stepped forward with a tight, nervous smile. "A stunning evening, Hyun-Woo-sama. And Jamila, you look formidable." Hyun-Woo didn't respond with words. He simply looked at the man, his fingers moving to his left sleeve to adjust his gold-rimmed cufflink. The mogul went pale, offered a shallow bow, and retreated into the crowd without another word. "You see," Hyun-Woo said, stepping closer until his shoulder brushed mine. "They no longer see a girl who can be dragged. They see a woman who can end them with a whisper in my ear." I looked at the reflection of the gold ring in the polished marble floor. I thought of the girl in the gold slip dress crying on her knees. She was gone, buried under the weight of the Yakuza's protection and my own burgeoning coldness. I had traded my vulnerability for a throne, and my fear for a crown of dark silk. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said, my voice projecting to the edges of the silent room. "Good," Hyun-Woo replied, his gaze finally meeting mine with a dark, shimmering pride. "Because a queen should never have to look over her shoulder." We moved toward the VIP dais, the crowd bowing in a rhythmic wave of silk and ego. I stood tall, the gold light reflecting off my ring, finally understanding that in this city, you are either the currency or the one who spends it. And as I looked out over the sea of silent witnesses, I knew I would never be spent again.